Hi, I'm Genevieve Marenghi, that's my birth and my author name. And this evening I'm here to talk about Titian's famous painting, The Rest on the Flight into Egypt, its extraordinary journey and how it inspired my own writing. Titian was one of the most celebrated artists in the Venetian Renaissance and the first to achieve international fame in his lifetime. When he died in 1576, he was considered one of the greatest painters to have ever lived, and I think arguably that still stands. He painted The Rest on the Flight into Egypt very early in his career. In fact, he was barely 20 when he finished this, which is astonishing for such a sophisticated work. It depicts an episode in the early life of Christ, taken from Matthew's Gospel, when Joseph is warned in a dream that King Herod planned to kill the baby Jesus. So Joseph takes Mary and Jesus into Egypt for their safety. As you can see, the figures are sitting in this lush, verdant landscape, a far cry from Egypt. But by doing this, Titian brings this episode into his time and his world. Even with this dramatic biblical theme, he's able to portray a humanity, a naturalism, almost a relaxed quality. It's the Virgin, infant Christ and Joseph, but really it's the universal tender embrace of a mother and child. The way the baby tugs at Mary's hair is something that all mothers can relate to. Titian's earlier paintings were often intimate in scale like this. It was painted in the early 16th century when Venice was a hugely cosmopolitan city, the center of trade for dyes, textiles, and the glassmaking industry, which really impacted the colors and pigments that artists could obtain. And probably as a result, Titian is one of the great colorists with his rich, vibrant palette. He certainly took full advantage of all those raw materials, and he was often referred to as the Prince of Color. If we go back to The Rest on the Flight into Egypt, you can see how he combines the red and blue of Mary's drapery and contrasts that with Joseph, who's wearing the complementary colors of yellow and purple. So your eyes are kind of like led round the picture by his use of color and light. It's always worth looking at Titian's use of white. I've been told by artists that it's tricky to apply white paint well, and this shows us how assured he was. Look how the little translucent veil on Mary's head contrasts with that much weightier white fabric in her lap, which symbolized purity. But I also want to talk about this painting's remarkable provenance, because this ravishing work of art has been on the most extraordinary journey, quite literally. We don't know who commissioned it, but in early 17th century Venice, it was in the collection of a wealthy spice merchant, Bartolomeo della Nave, who put together this incredible collection of all the contemporary or 16th century leading Venetian artists, such as Bellini, Giorgione, and Veronese. And he owned 15 Titians. We know that The Rest on the Flight into Egypt was part of that collection when della Nave died. Then this painting was sold as part of that lot to Basil Fielding, who was King Charles I's ambassador in Venice. Fielding negotiated the purchase of the collection on behalf of his brother-in-law, the first Duke of Hamilton, seen here in the armor. So it comes to England for the first time in the 17th century. During the Civil War, the royalist Duke of Hamilton was executed by Parliament in 1649, the same year that King Charles I is beheaded. The late Duke's brother quickly ships his collection to the Dutch city of Middelburg, both for safekeeping and to raise funds. The Rest on the Flight into Egypt was snatched up by the Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, governor of the Spanish Netherlands. The Archduke was assembling one of the finest collections of his age, as shown in this incredible famous collections or Kunstkammer paintings by David Teniers. You can see The Rest on the Flight into Egypt hanging by the doorway there. And it remains in the imperial collections throughout the 17th and 18th century until, in 1809, it gets looted by Napoleonic troops and taken to Paris for the Musée Napoléon. But it's returned to Vienna in 1815, where it hung at the Belvedere Palace. During the 19th century, it returns to England, as the painting's next owner was a Scottish landowner, Munro, who was one of Turner's most important patrons. Munro sells the Rest on the Flight into Egypt at Christie's in 1878, and it's bought by the 4th Marquis of Bath. And it remained in the family estate, hanging in the drawing room at Longleat House, Wiltshire. And then we jump to another dramatic twist in the tale, because in 1995, this painting was stolen from Longleat House, then owned by the 7th Marquis of Bath, and it remained missing for 7 years until the offer of a £100,000 reward, when it was discovered in a plaid plastic bag, minus its frame, at a bus stop here in Richmond, at Richmond Station, in fact, in 2002. Of course, this wasn't a random, it was a negotiated drop-off point that had been arranged by art detective Charlie Hill, former chief of the Met's Art and Antiques Unit, who'd been led to the spot by a man he described as a cross between Arthur Daley and Lovejoy. For those of us that remember those TV series. Following the theft, Hill had been contacted by the Longleat estate and had spent years chasing tips as to its whereabouts. According to the New York Times, it had been Hill that offered the size of a reward on radio, presumably funded by the Marquis, for any info that would lead to its recovery. Of course, the murky middleman had no links with the original thieves, honest, Your Honour. In any case, it finally paid off for all concerned, and the painting returned to Longleat. Charlie Hill spent his later years living in Richmond, and he kept a very low profile due to the nature of his work. Doubtless, he'd made some powerful enemies in the criminal underworld. He was also known for helping to find Edvard Munch's The Scream after it was stolen from the National Museum in Oslo in 1994, as well as recovering many other stolen paintings. Often, he would pose as an art dealer or museum employee to meet dangerous criminals. A Vietnam vet, Charlie was a colourful, self-effacing character, brave, canny, and passionate about art. He died in 2021, and I was very sorry never to get to meet him. So where is the Rest on the Flight into Egypt now? Well, it was sold again in Christie's in July 2024 for the trifling sum of over £17.5 million to an anonymous private collector, so sadly not on public view. But I'm sure you'll agree it's a remarkable tale of how a ravishingly beautiful painting travelled from 16th century Venice all around Europe with a brief stop here in Richmond. In fact, the painting's journey could be a whole novel in itself. But it became the inspiration for my debut novel, No Oil Painting, because when I heard a radio interview with Charlie Hill describing the Titian's return, it blew my mind, because I'm sure, like many of you, I go through Richmond Station all the time, and I couldn't shake the bizarre image of everyone rushing past this multi-million-pound masterpiece at a bus stop. And I remember thinking, what a great ending to a story that would make. That's not my actual ending, but the seeds of a reverse art heist were planted in my head. I've been volunteering at Ham House as the National Trust room and tour guide for many years, and I've been toying with the idea of writing a historical novel set in this Jacobean jewel on the Thames. But this radio interview inspired a change of tack. Why not write a contemporary novel set there? Brimful of stunning art, where better to set a reverse art heist? In hindsight, it also occurs to me that no present-day fiction has been set at a National Trust property, which is mad considering it's a huge British institution with over 5 million members. Thus, my love for Ham House, together with the volunteers' indomitable spirit, hatched Maureen, my wily septuagenarian art thief. Most people, particularly women, become invisible from the age of 50, but Maureen flips this into a superpower, allowing her to hide in plain sight. Grief, loneliness, and boredom provide powerful motivation for Maureen's cunning yet unhinged plan to steal her favourite painting. I also injected some darkness and trauma into her backstory to lend plausibility to her eve-of-life crisis. Some of Maureen's fellow guides rumble her theft of an obscure Dutch Golden Age master, Ambrosius Bossart's A Blackbird, Butterfly and Cherries, which does actually hang tucked away in the corner in the green closet at Ham House. But snitches get stitches, camaraderie wins out, and they decide to help. The unlikely gang find themselves in increasingly absurd situations as they try to return it without being caught. I had so much fun creating this motley crew and my seemingly innocuous anti-hero. Maureen lives in a tiny run-down cottage in the Alberts. She revels in lowering the house prices on her street. You might just spot her jumping the lights in her red Nissan Micra, but you can be sure she's got her eye on you. Do not be fooled by her dippy old bird routine. Just be sure to secure all your valuables. And if you're interested in Maureen's stories, I am selling copies of No Old Painting, which I'll be very happy to sign for you downstairs. And now I'm